This is a continuation of our last video, so let's pick up right where we left off.
So with that, welcome back to my channel, subscribers, and if you're new here, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you are notified when I upload the next video in this series. With that, let's get started. Moving on. So the next one on the stand is Perry Berman. Perry was Eric Menendez's tennis coach, and he was his coach for 6 months, and he met them in 1985, and he described an incident where Jose Menendez ran onto the court yelling about their lesson. So let's actually take a look at that footage.
Eric a lesson, and we were working on a certain type of game, more of a power game, serve and volley, and I was feeding him lobs, and fairly easy lobs, so he would gain confidence in his overhead, and Mr. Menendez came running onto the court. Again, East Brunswick Racket Club, it's an indoor structure, and he was behind the window, and he felt that the lesson, I was making it too easy for him, so he basically came down, run all the way to the far court on the right side, and basically started yelling at me, feeling that I was making it too easy for his son. And I tried to explain to him that I wanted him to gain confidence in his overhead, and he basically didn't understand, my reasoning for that, and just basically walked off, gave me basically a dirty look and walked off the court. And at that point, Eric said, "My father won't be happy until I'm running all over the tennis court, diving for tennis balls."
So he wanted you to be a little bit stricter with Eric and push him harder.
Right, that's correct.
So as you see there, Mr. Menendez believed that Perry was being too easy on them, and so was very forceful in his approach to addressing this issue that he didn't agree with. And so that was his experience of him at that point. He also described that he himself was friends with the Menendez boys, and that their father controlled who their friends were and who they dated, and also where they would go to school. And I'm not just talking about like your regular K through 12 school, like controlled all of that, of course, but also where they were going to go to college. He also described that if Mr. Menendez did not like the girl that one of the boys were dating, they would have to end the relationship because that was just the way it went. I know he had given an example of one girlfriend, I guess she was like a model or something, that they had met. The father did not like her because he felt she was with him because she was after their money. So he made them end that relationship. He also gave another example of a time he was at the Menendez's home for a dinner, and he was asked to leave because the family was going to have a family meeting, because apparently Mr. Menendez got really upset because he received a letter wanting him to pay for damage done to a pool table. So apparently Lyle had taken the blame for some damage that was done to a pool table back at Princeton, because that's where he was going to school. And so apparently they were having a party and someone damaged the pool table, and so Lyle took the blame for it, and as a result of that, they sent a bill to the parents. And so they had received that bill. And so then, Perry was sent home so they could have their family meeting and discuss this. And he said that it was his impression that Mr. Menendez was upset because he didn't want the outside world to have any information about any flaws or problems that the family had. And with Lyle taking on the blame for that damage, it reflected on him. And he did not like any kind of attention like that. Next on the stand is Mr. Richard Winowski, and he was the bodyguard of Lyle. So after the murders, as I described at first they are saying they don't know who killed their father, and as a result, they feared for their own lives, and so Lyle hired a bodyguard. He said that the reason why he was hired, from what he was told, was because Lyle was thinking that maybe it was the cartels or the mob who killed their parents, and so he was worried that he would be next. And so he hired this bodyguard. Richard also described a situation at one point, Lyle left Princeton and flew home to LA because, as he described, that his brother Eric had found somebody to look onto the computer to find information about the will, was what he understood it to be. And then he also described that at another time, him and Lyle were like at a restaurant or something, and Lyle was looking at his gun, his as in Richard's gun. If ballistics could be found on a bullet shot from that gun, and he said yes, they could be, and that Lyle asked him if you could find ballistics on a shotgun shell, and he said no, but of course that's not true. But he thought it was, so he had said no, that they couldn't. Through defense questioning, we actually find out that detectives took Richard to a bar or to a restaurant, and actually the restaurant that they went to was a restaurant that Lyle purchased after the death of his parents. As you know, the prosecution's case is that they wanted the parents' money. And so then after the parents died, they went out and bought a condo and this restaurant and like a Porsche or something. And it turns out that that's not completely the truth. A house was purchased, but actually was already in the process of being purchased for Lyle by Jose before their murder. So it's not like they just were like, okay, I'm going to go start shopping for condos. Though Lyle did shop and look at condos, the only one that was actually purchased and closed was the one that Jose Menendez was in the process of buying before his death. And so the reason why I bring up this issue about this bodyguard going to this restaurant was because it was really odd that the LAPD flew from LA all the way to him just to take him out to eat.
Correct. That 2 Beverly Hills detectives flew all the way across country to take you to a chicken wings restaurant? Is that what happened?
Well, that was a speculation on part of the witness.
Sustained. Well, where were you when the detectives first came up to you and asked you to go to this restaurant?
I was at work and at the offices of D.B. Kelly.
And all of a sudden they appeared in around the end of February 1992, was it?
Yes.
And they said, why don't you join us? And you got in the car and they drove you somewhere, right?
Yes.
And they didn't tell you where you were going or why they wanted you to come with them?
They said that they were going to Mr. Buffalo's and they wanted to look at the restaurant that Lyle had bought.
Did they say why they wanted you to go along with them?
No.
And so you drove over to the restaurant with them, and what'd you do when you got there?
Well, we sat down and had some very hot buffalo wings.
How were they?
Good.
There was objections through this whole thing, but what you pick up from it is, okay, what were you doing when these detectives came to talk to you? And where did you go? So we get that they went to Lyle's restaurant to try his food. Kind of strange, right? But that is what they did. So the behavior's looking already a little shady, but that's just in my opinion. You know, an interesting little story came out. So they're asking him, I guess at one point he was also in LA. The bodyguard was also in LA with these detectives, and they had went out to several places. And when defense was asking him, like, did you go here? Did you go there? Like, what else did you guys do? It was brought up, like, did you guys go to a go-go club, or I guess you would just say a strip club? And he said, oh, no, I would remember that. And, you know, the court laughed, whatever. And so that was the end of his testimony. And keep that story in mind. So we're going to move on to Glenn Stevens. And Glenn was one of Lyle's friends from Princeton. They were friends because they both went to Princeton, and they both felt like Princeton was too structured and they didn't get along with most of the Princeton type of people. So as I was just stating, how prosecution really focused in on their shopping after the death of their parents. And so Lyle bought this restaurant, and that he got a Rolex, but that Rolex was his father's. Then he had 2 Rolexes, and so he would also let his friend use it. And he also said that he had eventually purchased a used demo model of a Porsche. During Miss Lansing's cross-examination, we find out that Mr. Richard Winowski, the bodyguard, lied. Remember I was telling you, remember this story? Take a look at that.
Did you do anything with him after hours?
I believe we had a drink or two, yes.
And you and Glenn Stevens and Detective Zoller had a drink or two?
I don't know if Glenn was with us or not.
Did,
Yeah, he must have been. He must have been.
and did Detective Zoller take you and Glenn Stevens to a topless bar here in Los Angeles?
Oh, I don't remember that, sir. I would remember that.
You would have remembered that? And you don't remember that, but you remember going out with him and Glenn Stevens for some drinks?
Yes, sir.
So he's claiming he wasn't part of this strip club visit, but here we have testimony from Glenn that says otherwise. Let's take a look at that.
And have you formed a sort of a friendship with Detective Zoller?
Yes, that would be fair to say.
Okay. And when you're out here, as you were last August for the grand jury or now, do you see him in the evenings sometimes?
Yes, I did at the grand jury indictment, yes.
Okay. And what type of evening entertainment did you?
We went out for a few drinks and he showed us around LA.
Where did he take you?
Well, I don't know the town well, but like around the Sunset Strip and things like that.
And how long, when you went for the drinks, was this in a restaurant or what type of place was it in?
There were a few places. I know what you're getting at.
Well, why don't you just tell me then?
Yeah, it was, but on one occasion there was a go-go bar that we went into.
Was this a topless bar?
Yes.
And how many other bars did you go into with Detective Zoller?
Probably 2 or 3 at most.
And who was with you and Detective Zoller when you went in this topless bar?
The bodyguard, Richard Wenskowski.
I would remember that.
You would have remembered that?
It was also brought out that Glenn had talked to reporters over 15 times and to the police over 20 times, but refused to talk to the defense when the defense wanted to ask him questions. And again, this is Lyles' supposed friend, and he's refusing to talk to the defense to answer any questions. Yet, he is talking with reporters and he's talking with the police department and he's going to restaurants and he's going to strip clubs with these people. In my opinion, his testimony is not looking too trustworthy. But we'll just let that be what it is. Apparently, he had lied to reporters about Lyle, and when questioned about that, he said, the reason why he lied to the reporters was because he was upset with Lyle. So he just lied to the reporters about him. The reason why he was mad at Lyle was because Lyle talked condescendingly to him, like he was one of the workers. Yet he was one of the workers at Lyle's restaurant. So, I mean, if you're hired to do a job and someone talks to you like you are the worker, well, maybe because you are the worker. But Glenn took it upon himself to talk to reporters and lie about Lyle because he was mad about how he was talked to. So this is the type of character or personality that Glenn has. And so the reason why he worked at Lyle's business at this restaurant was because he wanted to take a year off from Princeton, and so he started working at the restaurant. And that Lyle was supposed to pay Glenn's parents money because Glenn had already paid the fees for that semester and then was going to drop out, and so he would lose that money for that semester. So Lyle said he would take care of it and give him the money so he could get his money and then work for the restaurant and everything would be square. But he also says that they never received any money from Lyle. However, it was also brought out that Glenn would often take money out of the register to pay himself for different things. So who knows if this money was ever paid or not. We also learned that Lyle spent actually a lot of money on Glenn when they were out shopping, and Lyle would actually buy him pretty expensive gifts. I believe it was like some leather belt from some high-end store that was like $200 or something. And he said at the time he didn't have the money to buy something like that, but Lyle surprised him and bought the belt and gave it to him. And then at another time he bought a flight for Glenn to fly to LA to meet Lyle out there, as well as some other friends. And so it also was interesting when Miss Lansing was cross-examining They went over his resume, and apparently Glenn lied a lot on his resume, and he said that he lied on it because that's what Princeton told him to do. That's how they taught them how to fill out resumes. And I'm going to say, I don't think he's lying when he says that, because I remember seeing a report back in the day, like, it was like one of those 2020 episodes that used to come out on Fridays. And it was talking about like these Ivy League schools and how the students have, these high GPAs and whatnot. And so it's like, oh, if you get a degree from like Harvard or Princeton or whatever, you had a great education and you make good grades and all this other stuff. But it turns out that like the professors are encouraged to score the students high to keep their GPAs high, to keep the school looking good. So when he said this, I mean, this was, I don't know, years and years ago, but when, I'm reviewing this old trial and he's saying that Princeton taught him to do that because they need to sell themselves and make themselves look good. So if they need a lie about it, then they need a lie. That is why I tend to believe that that is probably truthful. Moving on to the next person on the stand, it's Donovan Goodrow. And met Lyle at TGI Friday, a restaurant, and I guess they hit it off, were pretty good friends right away. And actually, Lyle didn't know that Donovan wasn't a student at Princeton. I guess he thought he was, but he wasn't. Lyle allowed Donovan to move in with him and Glenn, and I guess and the other roommates. As Donovan said, it was near the end of the semester. Lyle asked him to move out and that he forgot his wallet at the dorm and that like nobody contacted him or sent it to him. During the testimony of Glenn, the guy right before this, he described this situation about Donovan living with them, and he convinced Lyle that Donovan had stole some money from Lyle. And once Glenn convinced him of this, Lyle asked Donovan to move out. And apparently he had forgot his wallet. Glenn states that Eric noticed that the wallet was left behind and got it and looked through it and said, like, well, I should use this to replace some of the money he stole from me. This is according to Glenn. Lyle was upset that Glenn was insisting that Donovan was the one who stole money from him, because apparently he really liked Donovan and got along with him really well and was pretty close to him. It was brought out that Glenn was jealous of Donovan's friendship with Lyle. So, in my opinion, who knows if this actually took place? And I say if, because I mean, Glenn is already showing himself to be a pretty big liar. So I mean, knowing that Glenn himself worked for Lyle's business and was stealing money out of the cash register, and then like, okay, also money's missing from Lyle in their dorm, and then he's blaming Donovan for it, and so then Lyle's kicking Donovan out of the dorm. I wouldn't doubt it if Glenn was the one who took the money, but that's just my opinion. So back to Donovan, he was saying that he did notice his wallet missing, and the reason why he noticed was because when he was driving back to wherever he was going, since he had just got kicked out of there, he pulled over and couldn't find his wallet and didn't know where he left it. So we know that part of the story is true. However, we don't know if Lyle really said, I'm going to keep this because of the money he lost. Maybe he did. I don't know. It doesn't sound like Donovan was the one who took the money. That's all I have to say. Oh, and another note about Glenn, which I guess I didn't write in my notes, but while Glenn was working at Lyle's restaurant, he also in his resume, also referring back to his resume, one of the lies he had told was that he was a manager at this restaurant and he managed a staff of like 30 people or something, and it turns out that wasn't even true. And also, there was somebody who kept record of all the books for the business, and apparently the drawer was often coming up short, as I had stated earlier, how he himself would say, yeah, he would take some money to buy different things for himself without telling Lyle or anybody else. During like this period of time, the books started dropping in their price. So like it was like thousands of dollars was missing from the register or the books. And so I just don't find Glenn too credible. So Donovan said that the last time he saw Lyle or talked to him was that day he moved out, and he hadn't seen him until this day in court. He was asked if he had ever gone to dinner to the Menendez home, and he said that yeah, he had gone to the Menendez home at one point. Lyle had purchased a ticket for him to fly to LA to go have dinner with Lyle and the family, and he said that the dinner was pretty intense. And he said he was just like on pins and needles the entire time he was at this dinner. And he also described that Lyle actually prepared him for that dinner by like pretending he was Jose Menendez and Donovan being Donovan. And so he asked him questions that he knew his father would ask him to help Donovan be prepared for the dinner with Jose. And he said that they role played like this for like an hour. And he said that at the actual dinner that things were just as intense and went exactly the way Lyle had prepared him for this dinner. He described Kitty, which is Lyle's mother, that she was at the table and she really didn't ever talk during the entire dinner, and that it was just the men that were talking. And then like sometimes she would try to assert something, but the father and everyone else would just ignore her. So that was like the interaction she had at that dinner. Really strange. Another really strange thing to see too is the prosecution asking questions to the person on the stand from their seat. Like they didn't even bother to stand up and ask questions. Back to Donovan's description of how when Lyle kicked him out or asked him to leave, he said that Lyle did look sad and that they were really close with each other. However, once Lyle kicked him out, he never heard from Lyle again. Donovan was asked if Lyle had ever told him that Lyle and Eric were being sexually abused by their father. And he said no, that Eric never, or that he said no, Lyle never shared that information with him. As I was describing, the footage that I'm watching of this court, it's not parsed like day 1, day 2, day 3. So after this testimony, we got cut to, I'm guessing that must have been the end of that trial day, because then the following day, they actually played a video from the night before from a news report about Donovan's testimony. I'm going to play it so you can see it.
By his fourth courtroom testimony today, Goudreau told the story this way when questioned by Lyle's attorney, Jill Lansing.
That he and his brother had been molested by their father.
After hearing that in court and viewing the videotape of it, Rand had this reaction.
Donovan told me that Lyle complained to him the night of that dinner that Jose Menendez was sexually abusing Eric and Lyle.
What does that mean?
It appears that he has murdered himself.
Donovan Goudreau is due back on the witness stand in the morning for more testimony. Now, I should point out the reports of sexual abuse in the family and the boy's self-defense claim only surfaced publicly a few weeks ago. The audio interview you heard, the interview given to journalist Robert Rand, took place more than 1 year ago. David?
Well, Jim, do you think that as a result of this new information that has come out, the tapes that, of course, were aired exclusively on Prime 9 News tonight, that Goudreau could be recalled?
So he said even though he's seen that footage, he said he doesn't remember saying that. He said, yeah, that is my voice, but I don't remember saying that. He said he himself told Lyle that he was sexually abused by a family friend, and it was like this whole thing back and forth of like, well, he shared this with Lyle and Lyle listened and was very concerned about Donovan's abuse, and then shared the story of the abuse him and his brother Eric had experienced with their father. However, Donovan is saying he doesn't remember that happening. He only remembers himself sharing this information with Lyle. That's why when we're given this footage from the night before, it was actually an interview Donovan had done with an author. And he had told this author about this same story about Donovan being sexually abused by this family friend, and Lyle and Donovan had this conversation at a Chinese restaurant. And so when he was talking to this author, he was telling him like, yeah, I told him about this and he told me about his situation. And so we get this news clip here, and it's like, okay, this guy just wrecked the defense's case because he's saying in this interview that he knew about this because Lyle had shared it with him, yet now in court, he said he doesn't remember that happening. So when that was played in court, he says, yes, that's my voice from that interview, but I don't remember that. We're going to step away from Donovan for a second, and then we're going to come back to him because that was the end of the testimony with him, and we moved on to Robert Rand. Mr. Rand was the person who had interviewed Donovan that year prior about this case, and where Donovan said, yes, Lyle told me about this. So this is the guy. So they brought him into court, and prosecution wanted access to all of the information he had, and he said no, he didn't feel he needed to give that information, or because he said he was protected under some law, and that he didn't feel he needed or had to provide prosecution any of that information. Robert isn't an actual reporter contracted with any particular place. He kind of just like writes articles and then sells it to whatever outlet. Judge Wessenberg says since this is the case, he doesn't feel that Robert is protected under this law, and so he was ordered that he needed to turn over all of this information over to the prosecution. And with that ending, they put Donovan back on the stand. So with Donovan being back on the stand, they continued to ask him questions about like what he talked to Mr. Rand about, and he continued to say he doesn't remember that yes, that is his voice in this interview, but he doesn't remember any of this. So it was just like point by point, like you said this in there, and he's like, yeah, but I don't remember that. So I don't know. I don't remember that ever happening. It's like, well, where'd you get this information from? I don't know, because I was never told this, so.
But what I had heard, how did that conversation start? We were at a Chinese food restaurant towards the end in early May, and this I think is before he found out about my lies. And he said it was probably like, let's go have Chinese food tonight. We're best friends. We sat there and he says, I know everything about you. You know, you're my best friend. I love you. You know what I think it might have been? Because I think it might have been he found out a little bit about me, but he didn't believe it. He didn't want to believe it. He wanted to come back to me and see if I would tell him the truth. Or at least he was testing me. But still at the same time, it was 100%. You couldn't, it was real. You couldn't fake the kind of emotion he was giving me right then. And we're sitting there, and he says, I know everything about you, my best friend. I love you as much as my brother, if not more. He said, you know, we're family. As far as I see from here, we're family. Whatever. My two greatest concerns are my mom and my brother, and I try to help them as much as I can. I worry if anything happens to me, if they're going to be okay. He takes care of his brother. He just looks out for his brother. It's his biggest concern. And he said, you know, if anything happens to me, I need you to help take care of my brother for me. And if anything happens, you know, to you, I'll take care of your mom and brother for you. I mean, these kind of things were said back and forth across the table. And I want to be together forever. Anything coming between us, anybody, any girl, anything, just us. And he says, you know, is there anything I don't know about you? And I said, you know, as a matter of fact, there is. You know, when I was a kid, I was told I was molested. And in front of my father's, we were spending the weekend at a business friend's house. And telling the story, I'm all choked up because I can't believe I've never told anyone the story. And it's really personal. Yeah. And then that, you know, he was in tears. 20 minutes in speak. I'm telling him this whole story about, I can still remember, you know, the pictures on the wall and the color of the room and the carpet and the time it was, and, you know, everything about it. It's very clear in my mind. And I was just bringing it all back up, and I just choked up back, excused myself to go to the bathroom, just wiping the tears up, I guess. I came back and he told me about his father, and I guess maybe one of the reasons we were friends because we had so much in common with this way we suffered, experience, and then to bring this into the relationship as far as an experience we both shared that we'd never spoken to or about to anybody.
So basically, he said that his father did abuse and error.
Yeah, him and Eric. And
Lyle also.
yeah, and we take backs with this stuff. I just, you're right. It's weird because you felt we weren't drinking. We were just sitting there and whole physical. The chairs are up on the table. You guys,
You know, with being questioned about that again, he's saying that he doesn't know why he told the reporter that information, that he could have been lying. And when he told the reporter that information, but he doesn't know why he would be lying, but he also doesn't remember that knowing that information. So it's like, okay, well, if you're lying, where did you get this information from to lie to the reporter about? I just like the one thing that really continued to bother me with this is just like, okay, if he has zero memory of this, like, why didn't anyone ask, have you had any brain injuries? And I'm not saying that to be like funny, like, have you had any brain injuries that would affect your memory in the past from this time to this time? Or were you on any particular drug or medication at that time that would affect your memory? Or are you on that now that it's affecting your memory? Like, no one ever asked this information. And I really wish they would have, because that is really strange that he would have this information, share it with this reporter, and then he's on the stand going, yeah, that's my voice. I don't remember saying that. I must have just been lying. But how are you lying about something that you didn't even have information about? Well, I think Mr. Rand, the reporter, was leading me to those answers. And Miss Lansing was like, how was he leading you there when he never interrupted you during the time you were telling this story? And he's just like, yeah, I don't know. He then said that maybe it was Glenn who told him. Yet when Miss Lansing said, okay, well, if that was the case, how come when you ran into Glenn and you guys discussed this case, you guys were both, you, Donovan, you were surprised that Glenn knew this information about the molestation because he was close with him and thought he wasn't that close to him. So they were both like surprised that each other knew of this information. So then again, it's like, okay, well, Glenn couldn't have told you because you ran into him and you guys were both discussing this and you were both shocked that each other knew. And yet you told so you couldn't have got this information from Glenn. The reporter couldn't have been leading you there. Like, you're the one that knew this information and you're saying you didn't know it. So that's why I'm just like, why didn't anyone question him about why he doesn't have a memory of this? But what do you think about that? Like, what else, what other reason besides just like straight up lying and just holding the defense? Like, if you guys were with me during the Karen Reed trial, there was a point when those witnesses would get on the stand for the prosecution, and whenever they were asked questions by the prosecution, they had a lot of answers. But as soon as defense started asking them questions, they got amnesia. And so if you remember that, I had this whole thing was like, they knew nothing. They had no idea how they got wherever they did. They have no idea, just like anything. So like, outside of just purposely lying and saying he doesn't remember ever saying that, what his motive would be, I don't know. But like, what do you guys think? What do you think would be the reasoning for why he just has zero memory of this conversation with Lyle? Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and turn on notifications if they aren't already on, so that way you get notified when I upload the next video in this series. With that, have a good night, guys. Bye.